Hey, it's Scott Petrak with another episode of the Brown Zone Coverage Podcast. The preseason is over, the Browns have a new kicker, and their roster is set. And a week from tonight, the NFL regular season will get started. That seems like a lot to talk about, and to do just that is Dave Chudowsky of the WKYC Morning News. What's going on, Chud?
Scott, looking forward to this weekend. It's one of my favorite weekends of the year, even though the summer's over, not calendar wise, but kids are back in school and you got that weather's going to turn soon, but just something cool about Labor Day weekend. You got the fantasy football draft coming up, and we're just going to be a week away from Browns football in the NFL. And that's what makes the pain of losing summertime is that you got the NFL back. And let's be honest. I mean, that's what we live for, right? NFL games, NFL Sundays.
Yeah, and you get college football really kicks off this weekend. No,
Yep.
you're exactly right, Chud. I got a lot of season preview stuff to do, work-wise over this weekend, but I'm hoping to get to a party Saturday night, a little cookout. So yeah, it's a good weekend. And you're right, it really kind of marks the turn to not really fall, but in some sense fall. And then yeah, once football gets going, at least for me, it's 100 miles per hour.
Well, let's think about it. I mean, how many minutes have you and I spent on this pod, over the last, how many months talking about the Browns? And now finally we get to see everything we've talked about, everything the Browns have built. And, would you agree with this? I'm going to write a story that will air the Friday before the first game. And kind of the approach I'm going to go with, I'm not going to break down every position. That's not what the morning show is for, right?
Right.
People aren't tuning in at that hour in the morning to hear me break down kind of some of the things we break down on this pod. But I think the overall sense I'm going to go with, and tell me if I'm wrong here, is every year fans have high expectations because they're fans. I mean, we all want our team to be great, and you have gut feelings, or maybe this is. But don't you feel like it's playoffs or bust? That if this team doesn't get to the playoffs with the high expectations, and I mean this not necessarily from the fans' viewpoint, but from the front office standpoint, they've kind of gone all in, haven't they?
Oh, for sure, for sure. I don't think that's out of bounds at all, Chud. I mean, I remember flashing back to the Greenbrier when we talked to the Haslams, and they stopped short of saying playoffs or bust, but that's certainly the vibe. Now, you can envision a scenario where they go 10-7 or 9-8 and don't make the playoffs, and it's not considered a flop season, right? But there's not a whole lot of those scenarios. Like there's maybe 10-7 and don't make the playoffs, or 9-8, or Deshaun Watson gets hurt and something weird happens. But if they stay healthy and Watson stays healthy, yeah, the expectation is they're going to be right up there with, you would think the Bengals, right, who I think are the class of the division, but certainly right up there with the Ravens, the Chargers, like the playoff contenders in the AFC. And like, I don't think it's too much. Like I'm kind of hesitant when I say this, but I don't think it's too much to expect them to be on the same level as the Chiefs and Bills and Bengals, right? The teams that have been good, like the top of the AFC the last couple of years. The Browns have the talent, I think, to be in that discussion. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to get there, and so much rides on Deshaun Watson and how he plays, and we've talked about that a million times, and we'll continue to talk about that. But
Well,
they're set up to be there, right?
have,
They're spending the most money in the league, right? I think they're spending the most cash in the league. They have a super expensive quarterback. They have high-paid guys across the roster. I think your point is valid.
well, I'm going to stop a little short of that. Now,
Okay.
I am going to disagree with you a little bit. My expectation is for them not to be in the class of the Chiefs and the Bills and the Bengals just yet. Can they get there? Yes, but I, I still feel like they're maybe a year away from that.
Yeah.
I need to see it. What do I always tell you?
Yeah.
I mean, we're still talking about the Browns here. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and be disappointed at the end of the year if they fall just short of those teams.
Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying, and I agree to a point, but like I think inside that building, at least portion of that building believes that they can be there. And again, it goes back to finances. It goes back to the move to make Deshaun Watson, to get Deshaun Watson. When you pay him $230 million guaranteed, when you give up 5 draft picks, including 3 first-rounders, the expectation is that that's what you're going to do, is you're going to compete for Super Bowls. And to do that, it means you compete with Mahomes and Burrow and Allen and Herbert and all those other great quarterbacks in the AFC. I get your point that maybe it's a year from now, right, when Watson has another year under his belt, whatever. But you know how it works in the NFL, right? Myles Garrett's not getting any younger. Nick Chubb's not getting any younger, and his future is to some degree uncertain, just given the running back market, how it is, how the Browns proceed with him. Joe Bitonio's a year older. Amari Cooper, right? And he's getting paid $22 million. Like, there's going to be a lot of decisions this team has to make with key guys on the roster, or just from an age standpoint where I don't know if you can look and just say, well, you know, next year's when they make the big leap. You know what I mean? So I completely agree that playoffs is the goal and the expectation, and then we can quibble over just how far they should go in the playoffs.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I'll give you that. But are you saying Super Bowl or bust? I mean,
No.
You know,
I think no. I mean, I think you're right from the standpoint of if they get to the second round of the playoffs like they did in 2020, I think overall it would be viewed as a success, depending on how it goes, right? I mean, if they go 15-2 and then lose, then it's not. But let's say right on August 31st, if they get to the second round and lose to the Chiefs in Arrowhead like they did in 2020, and you feel like, okay, they're back where they were in 2020, then yeah, I think that's a success. I just don't think organizationally you can go into the season going, yeah, we'd be satisfied. Or I just think they built this team to win now. I guess that's the point. They built this team to win now, and I'm sure they don't want to put any cap on what winning means, if that makes sense.
Yeah, point taken. I'll give you that. All right, final preseason game against the Chiefs. The big story that comes out of it. This is the big story all preseason long. Cade York, he's gone. They said goodbye to Cade York. Are you surprised?
I'm not with the way it ended. You know, I mean, he misses that extra point early and then gets the penalty on the running into the kicker, which to me was a questionable call. It looks like he barely gets touched. And then he gets a chance to win the game at the end for the second week in a row. And I know it's blocked, but it was low and left. Now, maybe if it doesn't get blocked, it cuts back into the uprights, but felt like he was going to miss it. I don't think he hit it. He didn't hit it like he wanted. And that was a story of the preseason. Not only the misses, he just wasn't hitting the ball during the games as crisply as you need to. The ball striking just wasn't there. So when the struggles continued for all 4 preseason games, that's a terrible sign. I thought that they would be forced to make a move. Kevin Stefanski showed his hand a little bit on Sunday when he wouldn't guarantee that York would be the kicker week 1 when he'd been so publicly supportive. You could kind of see something was going to happen. Now, I think it was a really tough decision not tough decision that they shouldn't have cut him. Tough decision, and that they spent a 4th-round pick on him a year ago. That's a heavy investment on a kicker. Like, there's a lot of players in this league this year who were drafted after Cade York, and the Browns don't have their guy, and they spend it on a kicker, and we know the randomness involved in kickers, right? So it was a risky pick. They made it. It blew up in their face. It's tough to admit that and move on. But I just think York was so bad that they had no choice to move on, right? And now the interesting point, Chud, and I want your take on this. They wanted York back on the practice squad. Right. And to me, they wanted him back because then you have a chance to salvage this 4th-round pick, right? He stays in your building. You think he calms down. You think he gets his head straight. You give him another chance at some point, and he takes off, right? Like, we've seen that from kickers. Like, plenty of kickers struggle and then figure it out. So that's why the Browns wanted him back. But if you're Cade and he picked the Titans practice squad over the Browns practice squad, would you have made that same choice? Would you have wanted that fresh start somewhere else?
Oh, if I'm him, yeah, probably so. I mean, an easier place to kick. It's a fresh start. I mean, Cleveland's a tough place to kick. I don't know if he ever would have mentally been able to bounce back here, but I will tell you this, and you led right into my next question, because that's what I was going to say is, it goes back to the debate. I remember the radio stations and you and I and everyone, do you draft a kicker? It goes back to that question. I mean, they didn't just draft like 6th or 7th pick here. That was a pretty high pick to draft a kicker. So number one, do you do that? And number two, this could haunt them big time, because if he does turn it around and has success in the NFL, not only did they use a high pick to draft a kicker, but then they went and cut the guy, and he could turn it around and really have a solid NFL career. This could burn them on both ends of the camp.
That's a great point, Chud. It's a great point. And before I get back to your original question, I don't want to. I'm already forgetting what I was going. That's why I thought all the things you just laid out is why I thought maybe they would try to keep 2 kickers on the active roster for the first couple of weeks, not play York, sit him down. Like you couldn't afford to have him try to kick a winner against the Bengals. Not how he kicked in the preseason, but you could have kept him, let him still practice, right? Maybe even, and then say at the bye week, okay, let's give you another start, another chance, because they have the early bye. I thought that was a possibility. Now, hardly any team has 2 kickers on their active roster, right? Because those spots are so valuable. So I understand why the Browns didn't do it. But for all those reasons you mentioned is why I thought they might, because it's so hard to give up on that 4th-round kicker. You don't want him to come burn you somewhere else. So, yeah, I think those are all great points. Now, the problem, and they knew it was risky, and they took the risk by taking him in the 4th round. And maybe it's hindsight, but I think I felt this way at the time, is that's a big gamble. And I don't know if I would have made that pick in the 4th round. Now, yeah, maybe somebody else would have, and you don't get your kicker, right? So I understand why the Browns did, and I understand that they were trying to stop that carousel, the revolving door that they have had a kicker since Phil Dawson, right? Like they just haven't been able to find one. It was every year, every 2 years, they had to recycle because some guy would flame out. Even, they drafted Austin Seibert and he didn't work out, right? Like you can go down the list, but I keep coming back to this from the Browns are, they have all these smart guys, smart people in the organization, all the analytics. They know that there's an innate randomness to kicker. And I think they went against their kind of philosophy by taking York. And maybe that's because they thought he was 1 in a million. Maybe that's because they felt like the situation had become so bad that they had to do something drastic. Maybe Mike Prefer, the former special teams coordinator, convinced the front office that this was the guy. Whatever the reason was, they went out on a limb. And yeah, it's got a chance to break on him about 8 different ways. And the first way is you wasted that pick and had to cut him. And the other ways is that he could come back and, Craig Pete could come back in week 3 with Tennessee and beat you, right? If he comes off the practice squad by then. So, yeah, there's a lot of ways this can go bad, but it starts by taking the big gamble to draft a kicker that high to begin with. And you're right, Chud, there's a difference between 4th and 6th round. There just is.
Yeah, I hate the fact that he's on a different team now. I really do. Maybe it's the Cleveland sports fan in me going way back, but I hate that they had to let him go, but they were stuck. You could not send him out there right now with the expectations of this team. You just can't do it. They really put themselves in a bad spot there. And it's just amazing to think we had Phil Dawson for all those years on all those bad teams. And now we have what's expected to be a good team, maybe great team, and you don't have a kicker. It's crazy. And that leads us to Dustin Hopkins. So your thoughts on him? I mean, he's been around, 11 years, but he just lost out his battle against a second-year kicker, right? So, what are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I mean, he's a veteran guy that's made a bunch of kicks in this league. I think he's at 84, 85% lifetime field goals. Again, I keep saying this, there's a randomness to kickers, right? Like, is he Nick Folk? The Titans wind up trading a 7th round pick in 2025, the same thing the Browns gave up for Hopkins. Like, would you rather have Nick Folk than Dustin Hopkins? You can make that argument, but Folk's career numbers from a percentage wise aren't as good as Hopkins. He might have kicked in tougher places, right? He's been with New England, been with the Jets. But he's older. He's like 6 years older. He's 38, turning 39. Hopkins is 32, turning 33. So I think Hopkins makes sense, right? I don't think the Browns could have afforded to take a young guy that hadn't been in the league before, right? There's just too much uncertainty there. Now, yeah, Hopkins could come in and miss kick after kick, and then you're on the market again. But he's made a bunch of kicks. He's been in this league a long time. That means he's mentally tough to some degree, right? Because you don't last in this league in that position for a decade without being pretty strong between the ears. So I think it makes sense. You know, he's 50% all time from 50 yards plus. So I don't think, you know, York, that was going to be one of the advantages of York, right? He gives you a chance to kick 55, 60 yarders. I don't think Hopkins gives you the same confidence there. But right now, the Browns are at a point where they just want somebody to make a 45-yard field goal. And I think there is some trust level there with Hopkins that he will come in and make it.
Boy, you got to love, I remember talking about this last year. You got to love the new roster cut day. So now you have that ability, Scott, to go somewhere on Saturday night over Labor Day weekend, right? Because that's when the cuts used to be.
Oh, it used to be brutal. It used to be brutal, Chud.
Yeah, right over the weekend. But now we know the cuts, 53. Besides Cade York, top story, would it be Austin Watkins?
Yeah, I think from a cut perspective, it would be Watkins. You know, he was a big story preseason, right? Led the league with 257 receiving yards, had 2 touchdowns, looked good throughout camp. So he would be one of them. You know, I think the stories there, they kept Mahmoud Diabate, the undrafted linebacker out of Utah, had a couple big plays against the Eagles. Big guy, like 6'4", 225, runs. I think he's got a future at linebacker. They kept the undrafted safety, Ronnie Hickman, out of Ohio State, had 3 interceptions in the preseason. So anytime an undrafted guy makes a roster, that's a good story. You also have, so you got those guys. They kept Luke Whippler, the low draft pick out of Ohio State, at guard or at center. They also played him some at guard. They're a little weak at guard, but they can finagle that. They brought back Michael Dunn on the practice squad. They kept all their draft picks, right? Which Andrew Berry, that's been his template, is he keeps all his draft picks. So he kept all 7 this year, including Whippler, including Cam Mitchell, the Northwestern corner. But he wound up, you know, you want your GM for 4 or 5 years, and you can only keep so many of your overall draft picks. So he kept the new ones, he kept the rookies, but then Anthony Schwartz gets cut, Tommy Togiai gets cut, right? So Demetri Felton gets cut. So he had to finally step away from guys that haven't had the success that was hoped for when he drafted them, and he gave them a couple years, gave them 2 or 3 years, they didn't pan out, and they get cut. So to me, those are kind of the storylines coming out of cutdown day. And then yesterday, they claimed a corner from Kansas City. They cut A.J. Green, who's been pretty good as a backup corner, but they felt the undrafted rookie was just better. So, and then today, they brought back Maurice Hurst, the D tackle. He's going to be a big part of that rotation. That's more of a kind of roster manipulation thing. He didn't have to clear waivers because he's a veteran. So you cut him, you wait a couple days, you bring him back. They put linebacker Jordan Kanasic on IR. This is probably the 53. I mean, maybe there's another move or two, but I could see this being the 53-man roster heading into week 1. And then you can always bring up a couple guys from the practice squad that weekend for the game. But this is probably the 53-man roster that they're going to go into the season with.
So before last week's game, I asked you, you know, Watson's going to play and a couple starters are going to play, but why not Chubb or Garrett? It's like, how do you pick between, you know, these key guys? And Denzel Ward played, right? And he got a concussion. So, you know, how do you feel about that? I mean, do you think that was a smart move to play him? And are we going to not have him for week 1?
Well, it's awful easy now to say it was not a smart move, right? But
right.
But I think there was a ton of reasons, Chud, why it wasn't second guessing. It was first guessing if you're going to rest guys, which they did. They rested Chubb, they rested Garrett, they rested Bitonio, right? Why not Denzel Ward in that group. You're paying him a ton of money. He's got a concussion history. He's got an injury history. Like, are those 20 snaps really going to make a difference? And you can, like you said, you can make that argument for everybody. But there's a reason you're playing Deshaun Watson. It's because he didn't play football forever, and he needs these reps, right? Amari Cooper wanted the reps. He wanted reps with Deshaun Watson. Like, there's a reason. And maybe Denzel Ward told the coaching staff, hey, I want to play. But I think the coaching staff could have overruled that, number one. There's just too much history with Ward to play him in a meaningless game, in my opinion. And that's bared out with the concussion. And Chud, it's a mystery whether or not he's going to be able to play week one. You just don't know with concussions, and you know even less with concussions when a guy's had multiple. And this is number 4 documented since he came to the league in 2018. So to me, I mean, I'm sure the doctors that are examining him every day have a feel for, yeah, he's getting close, or maybe he's going to be close, and there's still 10 days to the opener or whatever it is. But you could feel good one day and not feel good the next day, and then not feel good for another week, right? Concussions are like that. So I think it's anybody's guess if he's ready to go week one. And that's a huge loss, period. And it's a huge loss against the Bengals team with the trio of receivers that they have, right? The Browns feel like they could match up with Chase, Higgins, and Boyd because they have Ward, Newsome, and Emerson. Now it would be Newsome, Emerson, and either Mike Ford or the rookie Cam Mitchell, right? Like, that's a big drop off.
Yeah. But they get Goodwin back on the other end.
Yeah, that's a boost. And talk about uncertainty, right? The guy's got blood clots, misses all the training camp. His return was uncertain. Like, you didn't know if he'd be able to play again. They activate him off the illness list. He begins practicing. He started practicing Tuesday. Looks good. He's been so engaged. Kevin Stefanski says he's never been around a guy as locked in as Goodwin was, even though he's hurt, right? He's working on the side. He's incredibly locked in. He's been running. So he expects to play week one. Now you need to, he needs to build up, and the doctors need to give him that final clearance. But that's a boost, Judd, because we talked about how much they missed him, how much they missed that speed element that he provides, that they went out and got him to have that downfield threat. So, I don't think we saw a lot of downfield shots in the preseason. And even in training camp, we didn't see a ton. I thought later in training camp, we saw more. And with Goodwin back, that gives the Browns that element that they're looking for during the season. The ability to throw the ball downfield, stretch it, to open things up for Nick Chubb, to open things up underneath, to open up the running game, the option game, all that. I think that's a significant boost for this offense.
Scott, when you look at the 53, are you surprised at the quarterback position? I mean, besides Watson, I mean, a lot changed from where we were. And are you surprised that Kellen Mond gets waived here on the final?
A little bit. I mean, you know what I'm a little bit surprised about, Chud, that he wasn't the third quarterback on the practice squad, right? They're going to go with 2 on the active roster, Deshaun Watson and rookie Dorian Thompson-Robinson. And what's interesting about that is now there's a new rule in the league. If you have 3 quarterbacks on your active roster, you can have the third one up on game day, not counting against your 46-man roster. And if there's the first 2 guys get hurt, you can play the third guy. And it's the rule coming out of that Eagles-49ers game last year when the 49ers lost their quarterbacks. Kevin Stefanski doesn't think that's a big deal. Doesn't think it's going to, the odds, the chances of it happening are slim. You just don't see it a lot. So it looks like the Browns are going to go with 2 quarterbacks on the active roster. And instead of bringing Kellen Mond back, they went out and got P.J. Walker. And the reason they did that is because he has experience, right? Mond hasn't started in this league. Walker has played with Carolina, won games with Carolina. And I think if you have a rookie backup like you do in DTR, it helps to have that third guy that's been a backup, started some games to help get DTR ready, as well as help get Deshaun Watson ready.
So what about the trade with the Patriots? What do you think about this running back, Pierre Strong Jr.? Sometimes I see trades like this and I just don't think much of it. I'm like, it's not that big of a deal. But could this be a guy that kind of comes out of nowhere and it does become a story? I mean, I don't know a lot about him.
Yeah, it's interesting, Chud. Bill Belichick said good things about him. Said he gotten better from last year to this year. He was a 4th-round pick in 2022 out of South Dakota State. Good speed, ran a 4.37 at the combine. So there's something to like there. To me, this move was about one thing, and that's the Browns didn't have a 3rd running back on the roster, right? You look at, Demetric Felton Jr. I just don't think had any explosion to his game. John Kelly Jr. wasn't same way, and he had a fumble. They tried to give the job to Jordan Wilkins, and he fumbled in the preseason finale and had a botched exchange with Watson. So the Browns are looking for that 3rd running back. And, Strong got drafted before Jerome Ford last year. Usually when the Browns get a guy, it's because they liked him coming out in the draft, especially when he's as young as he is. So I'm sure the Browns liked him. I don't know if they had him rated ahead of Jerome Ford last year, and I don't think they'll tell you that, but it's an interesting thought given that he went, I think it was 29 picks ahead of Ford. So, yeah, I mean, this is a guy that if he gets settled in, could you see him and Ford compete for that 2 spot at some point? Yeah, I don't think that's crazy. I mean, I think Ford had 8 carries last year and Strong had 10 in New England. So neither of them have any experience. So, yeah, I think he's an interesting guy. He gives you some special teams ability and maybe even some kick return ability, which so does Ford. So I think that's why they did it. They had a surplus at tackle, if you want to view it like that, with Tyrone Wheatley Jr. They probably weren't going to keep 5 tackles, and Belichick wanted to upgrade tackle and like Wheatley. So I think that's why it made sense. But, this guy's not going to take over for Nick Chubb this year, but he is a guy to keep an eye on to see how he fits with Ford.
Boy, what a bummer for Jakeem Grant Jr. coming out of that KC game. You got to feel for him. That's just awful. But, what do the Browns do now in that kick return game?
Yeah. Well, yeah, you do have to feel awful. I mean, the guy works so hard, right? He's 32 to come back from that torn Achilles, to go down on your first game rep, right? And it's not because he got hit. I think the knee just crumbled on him as he was returning that kick. And, I don't know this, but you figure it's probably connected to the Achilles, right? That's such a tough injury. Spending all his time rehabbing, all your muscles are linked, right? Odell would talk about that the ankle led to the hip that led to this. So I don't think it's far-fetched to wonder if they're connected. Tears his patellar, out for this year. I don't want to end the guy's career, but it's going to be awfully hard to come back from 2 straight huge injuries when you're 32, 33 years old. So it's a terrible situation for Jakeem Grant. And the Browns are going to keep him on the roster, Chud, which would have been interesting to see if they had a spot just for a return guy, right? Who would have lost out? Would they have cut a linebacker? Would they have kept one less defensive lineman? I think that's a possibility. But they don't have that dilemma now. But now the dilemma is who's going to return kicks. And I think you go from having a guy that provided some electricity, was a Pro Bowl player, had kick returns for touchdowns, to, okay, just protect the ball and it's not going to be as explosive. So I think Donovan Peoples-Jones is probably your punt returner. I mean, he had that 1 touchdown last year. He's gotten better as a punt returner. Now, he's not, I don't think he's ever going to be Josh Cribbs or Travis Benjamin, but he's serviceable plus, I think, as a punt returner. He's your 3rd receiver now, so it's not as big a risk as having a starting guy out there returning punts. And then kickoff, it's probably Ford or Strong. And you got to remember, with the new kickoff rules, you can fair catch anything and the ball goes to the 25. So if they don't feel comfortable with either guy, all they got to do is put somebody back there that can catch the ball, go to the 25, and turn it over to your offense. And I think that lessens the blow of losing Grant.
Well, maybe, if this writing thing doesn't work out for you anymore, and I know you've been doing it a long time, maybe you could go be a kick returner. You could do a fair catch out there.
I would think I could catch one. It's probably not as easy as it looks, but I think I could catch it, number one. But are you telling me something, Chud? You think I need to find a new career? Is that what you're trying to tell me?
No, I was
Okay.
just trying to start a career as a comedian, and I know that doesn't go well. So. Oh man, last thing for you, unless you got anything else, got to keep our eyes on Mr. Joe Burrow back at practice. That's your game number one opposing quarterback.
Yeah, that's huge. I've been always working under the assumption that he's going to play, right? Because he's Joe Burrow, and it's a calf, and he hurt it. I think it was July 27th. That's a long time, and I think it was a week. It was at least a week ago. There's video of him running sprints, right? So I was working under that assumption. He's back at practice. The Browns expect him to play. Now, maybe he doesn't move as well, and that's a benefit for the Browns, right? If they can get after Burrow, and they've had success sacking him in the past. And that Bengals O-line, I know they've tried to fortify it. I still have to see it, right? Is Orlando Brown, I think it's Orlando Brown, he's left tackle now. Is he the answer for them? I think he's a good player. I don't know if he's a great left tackle. So I kind of wonder about I just wonder about their offensive line. Is he susceptible back there? That could be a benefit for the Browns. But obviously, when you're facing Joe Burrow, he's one of the best in the business. So it's going to be harder for the Browns than if he weren't playing, and it's not even a discussion. So yeah, I think it adds to that game. If Denzel Ward is unable to play, Joe Burrow can take advantage of that, right? Better than other guys could. So yeah, it's huge news, but it's not. I don't think it's unexpected for the Browns at all.
Yeah, I pretty much figured that would probably happen, but have to see it. Have to see it first before you can predict it 100%. All right, that's it for me. Unless you got anything else.
I don't think so, Chud. Just imagine we do this next week. We'll make predictions. We'll make game predictions. We can make season predictions, right?
Oh boy,
it's a lot going on. A lot going on, buddy.
Boy, I'm gonna have to do some serious thinking this weekend.
I know, me too. I got to do my predictions column. I mean, I got a whole bunch of season preview stuff I'm working on for my annual season preview edition, and I think that comes out a week from today. I talked to Amari Cooper about his tandem with Elijah Moore. I talked to Juan Thornhill one-on-one. I get these one-on-one interviews. I'm working something on big, just overall on the defensive line. So I got a lot going, a lot of work to get done before the season, but that means the season's upon us. So
you never stop.
Yeah, right.
You never stop.
That's true. So it'll be a fun pod next week. I'm glad we got this one in. A lot of stuff to talk about this week. We'll have a ton of stuff to talk about next week. Thank you, Chud, as always. Thanks everybody for listening. This has been another episode of the Zone Coverage Podcast, and you could read all my work at brownzone.com. Thanks.